I used to think I knew the woman I married. But then came that morning, the morning that changed everything, when I found 2 coffee cups in the passenger seat of her car. It was a Saturday in late autumn, one of those gray, cold mornings when the air smells faintly of damp leaves and gasoline. I'd been planning to wash Emma's car for her, a small gesture to make up for how distant we'd both been lately. She'd mentioned how busy work had been, how she'd barely had time to breathe between her teaching job and the evening yoga classes she'd recently started taking. I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to. She'd left early that day, supposedly to meet her sister for brunch, and I had the morning free. The plan was simple: wash her car, surprise her, maybe feel like a good husband again. It was quiet. Our street always is that time of year, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own thoughts whether you want to or not. When I opened her car door, I was hit by the familiar mix of her perfume and the faint trace of coffee that always lingered in the upholstery. But something else caught my eye before I even reached for the cleaning supplies. 2 coffee cups, both from the same cafe downtown. One still half full, the other empty and capped, both tucked neatly into the cup holders. That's what did it. That one small detail, so ordinary it could have meant nothing at all, yet something inside me froze. Emma rarely bought coffee on her way to work. She was one of those people who always brewed her own at home, claiming cafe coffee was a waste of $5. I'd tease her about it. She'd roll her eyes, and we'd move on. But lately, she'd started stopping by that cafe more often. She said it was on the way to yoga. Still 2 cups? I reached for them, hesitant, as if they might burn. One cup had lipstick on the rim, hers. A deep mauve shade she'd started wearing recently. The other had no mark at all, but a faint indentation where a thumb had pressed into the paper sleeve. I picked it up. It was warm, just barely, but enough to tell me it hadn't been sitting there long before she left. And then came the lie. When she got home that evening, cheerful and flushed from brunch and a long walk, she tossed her keys on the counter and leaned in to kiss me. "You washed the car?" she said, spotting it gleaming in the driveway. "Yeah," I said casually, watching her face. "By the way, you left 2 coffee cups in there." She blinked, just for a fraction of a second too long. "Oh, right," she said quickly. "One was yours. From yesterday, remember? I grabbed us both coffee on my way home, but you'd already gone to bed." I smiled then, nodded, pretended I believed her. But I hadn't ridden in her car in weeks. It's strange how suspicion starts small, just a seed, but once planted, it spreads like wildfire. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, staring at the faint pattern of light spilling through the blinds, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. The house felt different, as if the walls themselves knew something I didn't. By Monday, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe I had forgotten a ride. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when she said she had a late staff meeting after work, that seed of doubt burst open again. I followed her. It felt wrong, juvenile, even, but I told myself I just wanted to quiet my thoughts. Her car pulled out at exactly 5:10, heading toward the main road, and I followed at a distance, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. She didn't go toward the school. She didn't go toward downtown either. Instead, she drove across town, through the older residential district, the one lined with big elms and houses built before anyone cared about garages. She parked in front of a small brick home with a red door, the kind of house that looked too perfect to be real. She sat there for a moment, glancing at herself in the mirror, then checking her phone. And then, he came out. A man, maybe mid-30s, tall, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel. He walked straight to her car, leaned in the open window, and kissed her. Not a friendly peck. A kiss with history. I felt my stomach drop. Everything I thought I knew about my life shifted in that single moment. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as they went inside together, the door closing softly behind them. I stayed there for 20 minutes, maybe longer. Long enough to feel the edges of my sanity blur. Then I drove home, slow, mechanical, my brain somewhere else entirely. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I watched her move around the kitchen, humming while she chopped vegetables, acting as though she hadn't just detonated our marriage that afternoon. She asked about my day. I said it was fine. She said hers was long, exhausting, that she'd grabbed a quick coffee before her meeting. Coffee. Always coffee. That word began to haunt me. Over the next few days, I became someone I didn't recognize. I checked her messages when she showered. I memorized her schedule. I noticed things I'd never noticed before. The faint traces of cologne that weren't mine, the sudden appearance of new clothes I hadn't seen her buy, the way she smiled at her phone sometimes, softly, like she was seeing something she loved. By Thursday, I decided to return to that house. I told myself it was to confirm what I'd seen, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The red door looked the same, neat and harmless in the fading light. I parked a block away, my heart pounding, hands trembling slightly as I waited. At 5:27, she arrived. She wore the same soft blue sweater I'd bought her for our anniversary. I watched her knock this time instead of waiting in the car. He opened the door, smiled, and she stepped inside without hesitation. I sat there, the realization settling like ice in my veins. I had proof. And yet, proof did nothing to stop the ache. I don't remember driving home. I only remember the silence when I walked through our front door, the echo of my own footsteps on the hardwood, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Everything looked the same, but it all felt wrong. Her shoes by the door, her mug in the sink, her jacket slung over the chair, all suddenly belonged to a stranger. When she came home later, she was glowing, radiant. Her hair tousled slightly, as if from wind, or from hands that weren't mine. She poured herself a glass of wine and joined me on the couch, curling her legs under her like she always did. Long day, she sighed. I studied her face, the face I once loved without question, and realized I didn't know her anymore. I wanted to ask, to demand the truth, to shout, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at her wine glass, the lipstick smudge on the rim matching the one I'd seen on that first coffee cup, and I knew. She caught me staring and smiled faintly. What? Nothing, I said softly. Just thinking. And in that moment, I decided. If she was hiding something, I was going to uncover every single detail of it. Not with shouting, not with pleading, but with quiet, deliberate precision. The same way she deceived me. Carefully, invisibly. That night, after she fell asleep, I walked outside into the cold, damp air and looked at her car sitting in the driveway. The 2 coffee cups were gone, but their ghost remained in my mind, sharp and vivid. Tomorrow, I told myself, tomorrow I'll start digging. Because 1 coffee cup might have been innocent, but 2 meant someone else had been sitting where I was supposed to be, and I intended to find out exactly who. The next morning arrived gray and still, the kind of sky that looks like it's holding its breath. Emma was already gone by the time I woke, her half of the bed cold, her perfume faint on the pillow. For a few moments I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the previous day like a film loop that refused to end. The red door, the man's hand at her waist, the way she smiled as she stepped inside. I needed to know who he was. That thought circled endlessly as I sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in my hands. The house, once filled with the background hum of normal life, our kids' cartoons, Emma humming while she made breakfast, felt hollow. Every sound now carried too much meaning. The refrigerator clicking on, the wind brushing against the window, the faint drip of the faucet. I logged onto her laptop. She'd always left it open before, but lately she'd started closing it, locking the screen. A new habit. I didn't have the password, but I did know her phone PIN. She'd never changed it from her birthday. It was enough to start with. When she came home that afternoon, I'd already made up my mind. I wouldn't confront her yet. I would act as if everything was normal. I smiled. I asked about her day. I made her dinner. She was distant, though. That subtle kind of distance where the body is present but the mind is elsewhere. After she went to bed, I took her phone from the nightstand. My hands were trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. I felt like a thief in my own home. I plugged it into my computer, a data transfer app waiting. Messages, call logs, photos, all copied. I placed the phone back exactly where it was and lay awake the rest of the night, waiting for dawn. The next morning, while she showered, I opened the clone data. At first, everything looked normal. Texts with her sister, reminders from her yoga studio, calendar alerts. Then I found a thread with someone saved under a single letter, D. The messages were cautious, phrased like 2 people hiding something. D. Same place today? Emma. Can't. Too risky this week. D. I miss you. Emma. I know. Soon. My chest tightened. There were more. Dozens of messages, each one worse than the last. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. You smell like cinnamon. Next time I'll lock the door faster. It wasn't just an affair. It was intimacy, quiet, practiced, deliberate. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, numb. The sound of the shower stopped upstairs, and I barely had time to close everything before she appeared in the doorway, towel around her shoulders. "You're up early," she said with a soft smile. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. "Work's on my mind." She nodded, kissed my cheek, and moved toward the kitchen. I watched her go, every movement seeming choreographed now, rehearsed. I knew I couldn't let her see my hands shaking. That day at work, I was useless. Numbers swam on the screen, meaningless columns that refused to settle into place. All I could see was her phone, her laughter with that man, the 2 coffee cups. By the time I drove home, I'd made another decision. I wasn't going to just catch her. I wanted the truth captured so completely she could never deny it. I ordered 2 small cameras online, ones I could mount discreetly. One for her car, one for the entryway. If she was meeting him again, I'd know. I told myself it was about clarity, not revenge, but even then, I think I knew better. The packages arrived Thursday. I installed them after midnight while she slept, moving silently through the garage and driveway like a burglar. The camera in her car was small enough to fit inside the vent beside the dashboard, angled toward the passenger seat, the seat that wasn't supposed to hold anyone but me. The next few days were agony. She was sweet again, almost tender, like she sensed something changing but didn't know what. She made breakfast, sent me texts during the day, ordinary messages that felt like knives. Then Friday came. She said she had a meeting with the PDA. I kissed her goodbye at the door, pretending everything was normal, and the moment her car disappeared down the street, I opened the app connected to the dashboard camera. The feed blinked to life. She wasn't alone. The man, D, sat beside her, laughing, his hand on her thigh. They pulled into that same quiet street, parking in front of the red door house. My chest constricted so tight it felt like my ribs might crack. I watched her turn toward him, their lips meeting before the video cut out. The signal lost. For hours, I sat at my desk staring at the frozen image. 2 people laughing in a space that used to be mine. When she came home that night, she smelled faintly of cologne, one that wasn't mine. She kissed me lightly, then excused herself to shower. I stood in the kitchen, staring at her half-empty wine glass, the lipstick print gleaming faintly in the dim light. That night, I transferred the footage to my computer, labeled it Finances 2021, and tucked it deep into a folder only I knew about. It didn't feel real, like I was watching someone else's tragedy. Saturday morning, she left early again. I followed. This time, I stayed close enough to see where he lived. The house was near the river, modest but well-kept, a garden out front with untrimmed lavender. I parked a block away, camera ready, and watched as she stepped from the car, holding 2 cups of coffee. 2 cups. Always 2. She knocked, and he opened the door. I snapped a photo just before they disappeared inside. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, the sky turning from gray to gold, until she came back out, hair messy, smiling to herself. When she drove off, I followed the man instead. He went downtown, parked near the university, and walked into a faculty building. My heart sank. A teacher. Like her. His name was Daniel Harper, D. They taught at the same school. I found his staff page online that evening, his smiling photo beside a description of his literature classes. I stared at his face for a long time. That night, when Emma returned, she was glowing again. "The yoga retreat was amazing," she said, slipping her shoes off. "I feel brand new." I forced a smile. "I'm glad," I said softly. "You deserve to feel good." Inside, something was unraveling. I wasn't sure if it was anger, grief, or a mix of both. I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in her face, but instead I just looked at her car keys on the counter and remembered the warmth of that second cup. As she brushed past me toward the hallway, I caught the faintest scent of coffee on her sweater, and something else. A man's cologne. That night, I opened the hidden footage again. The grainy still frame stared back at me, her hand in his. Their laughter. Their coffee. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe. I realized then this wasn't about the affair anymore. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about erasure. She'd replaced me, 1 coffee cup for another, 1 passenger for another, and done it so quietly I hadn't noticed until it was too late. But now I saw everything, and I wasn't going to let it end here. The next morning, I wrote his name, Daniel Harper. on a piece of paper and pinned it beneath the first photo I'd taken of the two cups. I told myself I'd confront her soon. But deep down, I already knew. Confrontation wasn't enough. No, I wanted her to feel it. The way I did. I wanted the truth to destroy her world as completely as she had destroyed mine. And I had just begun to figure out how. It's strange how quickly obsession replaces heartbreak. One moment you're crying in your car, watching your wife kiss another man. The next, you're sketching plans, thinking in blueprints instead of emotions. I guess it's the engineer in me. When something breaks, I don't throw it away. I take it apart, study its pieces, learn how it failed. But this wasn't a machine. This was my life. And Emma was the fault line. By the following week, my grief had hardened into calculation. I woke up early every morning, pretending to make coffee before work, but I wasn't tasting it anymore. I was studying patterns, her routes, her calls, her language. Every lie had a rhythm, and soon I could recognize the beat. Monday, staff meeting ran late. Wednesday, yoga with Sophie. Friday, early class prep. Each one marked the same time window, between 4:30 and 7 p.m. That's when she saw him. I had two goals now. Prove everything beyond doubt, and make them both pay for underestimating me. The first part was easy. The second required patience. I started small. I copied her car key while she showered, then slipped it back into her purse. I bought another miniature camera, smaller, better audio, and hid it in the lining above her dashboard. The footage streamed directly to my phone. The first day I tested it, nothing happened. She drove to work, drove home, and for a brief moment I thought maybe she'd ended it. Then came Thursday. I watched from my office as the live feed flickered to life. Emma was parked outside the same brick house with the red door. Daniel climbed into the passenger seat. They laughed about something. I couldn't hear the words, but their faces told enough. Then they both leaned in, the kiss soft but familiar, and my hand tightened so hard around my phone that my knuckles popped. The camera caught everything. Every glance. Every touch. When they parted, she brushed his cheek tenderly. "See you tomorrow." Her lips shaped the words, soundless but unmistakable. Tomorrow. When she came home that night, I was waiting on the couch, pretending to read. She set her purse down, humming. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, forcing calm. "Just tired. Long day." "You should get some rest," she said kindly. "Want me to make tea?" I almost laughed. Tea? How perfectly domestic. I watched her move toward the kitchen, the faint sway of her hips, and wondered if he'd memorized that rhythm too. Later, when she slept, I downloaded the video. I labeled the file invoice_Q3 and stored it on an external drive. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. I just knew it was power. By Saturday, I was done playing the passive husband. I wanted to see his face up close, to hear his voice, to know exactly what kind of man thought he could take my place. So I followed him. Daniel left the school around 4, walking briskly to his silver SUV. I trailed him through the late afternoon traffic, the low sun flashing against my windshield. He stopped at a cafe, and went inside. I parked 2 spaces away, watching through the glass. He ordered 2 drinks. I didn't have to guess who they were for. When Emma arrived 10 minutes later, she was dressed differently, more casual, her hair loose. They sat together, close, laughing like old friends. She touched his hand across the table, subtle but deliberate. My throat burned. I could hear their laughter even through the glass, muted but cutting. I snapped a photo. Then another. Then one more as she leaned over to kiss his cheek. I left before they saw me. That night, I transferred every file, texts, videos, photos, into a folder titled Blueprint. A habit of mine, give chaos structure. But as I looked through them, something shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was fascination. The way she smiled at him. That was the smile she used to give me. The softness in her face, the trust in her eyes. I realized, painfully, that she'd never looked at me like that in months. And maybe, deep down, I knew it wasn't only his fault. Maybe we'd both let something die quietly between us. But that thought didn't comfort me. It just made me hate him more. The next day, I called in sick. Emma kissed me goodbye, told me she'd check on me later, and left. The moment her car was gone, I drove to the Red Door house. Up close, it looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Curtains drawn, a few leaves gathered on the porch, a wind chime clicking faintly. I knocked. No answer. I looked around, then noticed a side window slightly open. just enough to slide a small envelope through. Inside was a USB drive with the footage I'd taken, labeled only with the date and time, and a short note. Does she ever tell you how many lies she's practiced before she comes to see you? I didn't sign it. That night, she was quiet at dinner, distracted. When I asked if something was wrong, she said, "Work drama." But I saw the worry flicker in her eyes, like a candle guttering in the wind. The following morning, she was tense, checking her phone constantly. I pretended not to notice. I knew she must have gotten a call from Daniel by now. I imagined him demanding answers, her denying everything. By evening, her composure cracked. She came into the living room, pacing. "Something weird happened," she said finally. I looked up from my book. "Weird how?" "I think someone's been following me. Or maybe just watching. There was a strange message on my car today." "Oh," I asked gently. "What did it say?" She hesitated. "It doesn't matter. Probably just kids." She forced a smile, but her hands were trembling. That was when I knew I had her attention. Fear had a way of loosening truths, and I wanted her afraid. Not of me, not yet, but of what she didn't understand. The next few days unfolded like a chess match. She grew quieter, less sure of herself. The late meetings stopped. She drove straight home after work. She clung to me a little more, as if proximity could erase guilt. And part of me almost pitied her. Almost. But pity isn't the same as forgiveness. That Friday, when she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from D appeared. "We need to talk. Someone knows." My reflection stared back at me from the dark phone screen. Calm, collected, unrecognizable. I'd become someone else entirely. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched the faint rain streak down the glass. Outside, her car sat gleaming in the driveway, innocent as ever. 2 coffee cups still rested in the console from yesterday. I remembered the first one I'd found, the moment everything started. A symbol so small, so ordinary, yet it had undone my entire life. And now, standing there, watching the rain bead on the windshield, I realized I wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the truth was only the foundation. The revenge, that would be the architecture. And I was just beginning to draw the blueprints. By the time the first snow came, everything between us had become an act. We moved around each other like 2 performers locked in the final scene of a play neither of us wanted to admit was ending. Emma smiled more than ever now, but her smiles had that tight, deliberate quality, like she was painting them on for my benefit. Her laughter was softer too, almost hollow. If she was afraid someone knew, she never said who she suspected. But her eyes flicked to the windows more often. She double-checked the locks. And every time her phone buzzed, she jumped. Daniel, I guessed, was unraveling too. He hadn't called our house, but I could sense his panic through her mood. I'd given them silence. And silence is the cruelest form of pressure. It forces people to fill in the blanks themselves, and what they imagine is always worse than the truth. For me, that silence was oxygen. Each evening after she fell asleep, I'd watch her car feed, the motion sensor blinking to life whenever she opened the door. She didn't see him anymore, at least not at that house. But she kept the second phone hidden in the same place, the vent above the glove box. I knew because I'd watched her slide it in there after every shift. I waited until a Wednesday morning when she left for work early. The street was quiet, snow muffling every sound. I unlocked her car using the spare key I'd made and retrieved the phone. It was cheap, burner style, the kind that didn't need contracts. There wasn't much on it. She must have deleted most of the messages, but she'd missed one. "D, we have to meet. He knows. I can't do this anymore. Please." It was dated 3 nights ago. She hadn't responded. I scrolled further and found older ones, the kind you could only write if you thought no one would ever see them. "You smell like cedar. When you laugh, it's like summer again. I wish I could wake up next to you and not feel guilty." I read every one of them twice, then placed the phone exactly where I found it. That night, I acted like nothing had changed. We made dinner together, pasta with too much garlic, her favorite. She looked tired but calmer, like she'd finally convinced herself the danger had passed. I watched her pour a glass of red wine, her hand steady again. When she reached to refill mine, our fingers brushed. For the first time in weeks, she met my eyes without flinching. "I've missed us," she said quietly. "Me too," I answered. And it wasn't entirely a lie. We spent the evening talking about the kids, about next summer, about maybe taking a trip somewhere warm. I let her believe everything was healing. That was part of the plan, because the more she relaxed, the more convincing her fall would be. By Friday, I had everything prepared. I printed the photos I'd taken at the cafe, their heads bent together over steaming mugs, her hand on his wrist, and sealed them in an envelope. I added screenshots of her texts, the video stills from her car camera, and a simple note that read, "Your husband deserves honesty. Don't you agree?" It was addressed to Margaret Harper, Daniel's wife. I'd found her name in the school's staff directory. She taught art at a nearby elementary school. I mailed it that afternoon. That night, Emma was restless. She paced before bed, claiming she'd had a strange dream. "Everything feels off," she murmured. "Probably just winter fatigue," I said gently. She nodded but didn't look convinced. The next day, I got confirmation. Around noon, she received a call while we were out shopping. Her face drained of color. She stepped away from me, voice low, trembling. "I can't." "No. Listen, not now," she hissed, then ended the call. She didn't meet my eyes the rest of the day. By evening, she disappeared upstairs, saying she had a headache. I gave her an hour before following. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in her hands, shoulders shaking. I stood in the doorway, silent. She looked up, startled, eyes red. "It's nothing," she whispered quickly. "Okay," I said, and left her to cry. It was almost peaceful, that quiet unraveling. Sunday morning, she woke before dawn and sat beside me on the bed. "Do you ever feel like you've made terrible mistakes?" she asked suddenly. I pretended to think. "Everyone makes mistakes." She searched my face, waiting for something more, but I didn't offer it. She turned away, pulling her robe tighter. After breakfast, she announced she had errands to run. I watched her drive away, snow crunching under the tires. Then I turned to the live feed on my phone. Her car didn't go toward the grocery store. It went toward the Red Door house. When she parked, she sat for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. I watched her take out the burner phone, type something, then drop her forehead against the glass. After a minute, she got out. Daniel met her at the door. They didn't kiss this time. They argued. Even without sound, I could read the desperation in his movements, the way he reached for her, and she backed away. She was crying. He tried to grab her hand. She pulled free. He shouted something, his arms sweeping wildly. Then she turned and ran to the car. The feed cut off when she slammed the door. When she came home that afternoon, her eyes were swollen. She mumbled something about seeing her sister again. I nodded, as if I believed her. That evening, I went for a walk. Snow fell softly, the world muffled in white. I stopped at the mailbox at the end of our street. Inside, among bills and flyers, was a small envelope addressed in neat handwriting. No return address. Inside was a photo. Emma and Daniel, together at the cafe, the same image I'd mailed 3 days earlier. Only this copy had red ink scrawled across the bottom. "He knows." My chest tightened. I looked up and scanned the quiet street. Every window seemed darker than it should have been. Back home, Emma was upstairs, lights dimmed. I slipped the photo into my desk drawer. She asked from the hallway, "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. But I wasn't fine. Someone else had entered the game. Maybe Margaret. Maybe Daniel. Or maybe Emma herself had discovered what I'd done and was testing me in return. For the first time since this began, I felt something close to fear. That night, I woke to the faint sound of her car starting. The clock read 2:18 a.m. I crept to the window, parting the curtain. Her taillights glowed red against the snow, then vanished down the hill. I grabbed my coat and keys, following on instinct. The roads were empty, the snow unbroken except for her tracks. She drove fast, reckless, until she turned into a narrow side street, the one with the Red Door house. But this time, the house was dark. She sat there in the car, engine idling. Then she opened the door and stepped into the falling snow, phone in hand, staring up at the house like she expected someone to answer. After a long minute, she began walking toward the river. I pulled over and got out, my breath fogging in the cold. The snow muffled everything. The crunch of my boots, the distant hum of the current below. She stopped at the edge of the embankment, just staring into the water. I froze halfway down the path, unsure if I should call out or wait. Her shoulders were shaking. She dropped something into the river. I saw the flash of metal before it vanished beneath the ice. Then she turned. Her face was pale in the dim light, eyes wide, searching the darkness. For a moment I thought she saw me. Her lips parted. "Who's there?" she whispered. I didn't answer. She backed away slowly, then ran to her car. The door slammed, the engine roared, and the taillights disappeared again into the storm. I stood there until the snow covered her footprints. When I finally returned home, the house was silent. Her side of the bed was empty. On the nightstand sat her phone, but not the burner, the real one. A single message glowed on the screen, unsent. "I can't do this anymore. Please forgive me." The timestamp read 2:15 a.m. 3 minutes before I'd followed her. I sat there staring at the screen until my vision blurred. I didn't know who the message was meant for, me or him. Maybe it didn't matter. Because whatever she dropped into that river, it had changed everything. And I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly what it was. The next morning, the world felt different, brittle, hollow, like it might shatter if I breathed too loudly. Emma wasn't home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The kids were at my mother's for the weekend, and the silence was almost unbearable. For a long time, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the message still glowing on her phone. "I can't do this anymore. Please forgive me." Those words circled endlessly in my head as I replayed the night. Her walking into the snow, the river swallowing something shiny, her voice calling into the darkness. She hadn't known I was there. She'd been talking to the ghosts of her own guilt. By 8 a.m., I started calling. No answer. I called her sister, who said Emma hadn't shown up for their morning yoga class. Her voice sounded too casual, the kind of tone people use when they're trying to convince themselves nothing's wrong. Around 10, the doorbell rang. It was Detective Leland, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a face that looked like it had seen too much winter. She asked if I was Michael Hayes, my full name, spoken carefully, like she was reading it from a note. "Yes," I said. "What's this about?" "Your wife," she began softly, "was found early this morning near the riverbank." The room tilted. She kept talking, but her words came like muffled echoes. "Hypothermia, shock, minor injuries, hospital. Not dead." That phrase broke through the haze like light through fog. I followed her to the hospital. Emma looked small under the fluorescent lights. Pale, trembling, her hair damp and tangled. When she saw me, she flinched, not from fear exactly, but recognition. The way you'd look at a mirror that suddenly reflected a stranger. The nurse said she'd been found by a passing jogger at dawn, sitting on the embankment, half conscious. The police thought it might have been a suicide attempt, but there were no injuries consistent with a fall into the river. She'd simply sat there until the cold nearly stopped her heart. When we were alone, she whispered, "You followed me." I didn't deny it. She closed her eyes. "I saw you. Last night. I thought I imagined it." "You dropped something?" I said quietly. "What was it?" She hesitated. "The other phone. I threw it in the river. I wanted to end it." "The affair." Tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks. "It's over. It's been over for weeks. I was trying to fix things, Mike, but you..." She stopped herself, trembling. "You knew, didn't you? All this time?" I sat down beside her, feeling the weight of months press against my chest. "I knew," I said, "since the coffee cups." She laughed softly, a hollow, broken sound. "The coffee cups. God, something that small." I wanted to tell her that small things are how betrayal always begins, not with grand gestures, but with details that don't fit. But the word stuck. She took a breath. "Daniel's wife found out. Someone sent her everything. Pictures, messages, videos. He said he thought it was me, that I was trying to ruin his life. I told him I didn't know how she got them. I swear I didn't tell her. He wouldn't believe me." Her eyes met mine. "Did you send them?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence between us thickened until even the machines seemed to hum slower. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you lied," I said. "Because you made me doubt my sanity. Because every night I looked at you and wondered who you really were." "I know," she said, voice breaking. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But what you did, that wasn't justice, Mike. That was cruelty." She turned her face away. "Daniel's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "His wife kicked him out. He left town last night. He said he couldn't live with what he'd done." Her voice cracked. "He said he was thinking about ending things." For a moment, the room felt too small to hold the sound of her words. That afternoon, she was discharged. She insisted on taking a cab to her sister's house, not home. I watched her leave through the sliding hospital doors, her figure shrinking until she disappeared into the snow. When I returned to our empty house, It felt more like a crime scene than a home. Every object was evidence. Her hairbrush on the counter, her sweater draped over the chair, the faint imprint of her head on the pillow. I walked from room to room like an investigator, seeing traces of our life as if they belonged to someone else. On the kitchen counter sat her coffee cup, still half full, lipstick mark faint but visible. I picked it up and turned it slowly in my hands. The same kind of cup I'd found that first morning. The same mark. I poured the coffee down the sink and rinsed the cup clean, watching the brown swirl vanish down the drain. That night, I opened my laptop and deleted every file. The photos, the texts, the footage. Each click of delete felt like tearing a stitch. When the final folder disappeared, I sat in the dark and waited for relief that never came. Days passed. The snow melted. Emma didn't call. I didn't either. Then, one afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name printed neatly in blue ink. Inside was a single item, a photograph. Emma and me, from years ago, sitting outside a cafe, both holding coffee cups, smiling at each other like the world was simple. On the back, in her handwriting, were 3 words. I remember us. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb traced the edge of her handwriting, the soft loops of the letters. For the first time in months, my anger began to dissolve, not into forgiveness, but into something quieter. Fatigue, maybe, or understanding. Because in the end, revenge hadn't fixed anything. It had only made sure there was nothing left to repair. I placed the photo on the mantel, beside the vase of dead tulips she'd bought weeks before everything fell apart. I didn't throw it away. I couldn't. Later, I walked to the river. The air was cold but clear, sunlight glinting on the ice where she'd stood that night. The current whispered softly under the frozen surface, carrying everything we'd both thrown into it. Her phone, my hatred, our marriage. In my coat pocket, I carried one last thing. A single coffee cup lid from that first morning, the one I'd kept without knowing why. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the small logo, the faint indentation of her thumbprint pressed into the cardboard. Then I let it fall into the river. It floated for a moment, spun in the current, and slipped beneath the surface. I stood there until the sun dipped below the trees. The cold bit through my coat, but I didn't move. Because for the first time since all of it began, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like truth. And that, finally, was enough.